Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabashaliva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Shrey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you're joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use our chat to post any questions for our guest. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. It's my pleasure to welcome Jurij Dobczansky from Washington, D.C., who is a senior cataloging specialist in the East Central Europe section of the Germanic and Slavic Division of the Library of Congress, United States. Jurij will be talking on his work, Librarian as Witness, Documenting Ukraine, offering an insight into developing metadata for Ukrainian resources in the libraries during this war. Thank you very much, Jurij, for being with us. Microphone is yours, please.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be able to participate in this webinar presentation, and I thank my friends who encouraged me to do this. And I'll start off by defining why I chose the word witness. What does this mean? Well, first of all, we're confronted as librarians by an incoming massive amount of resources, and this is where we come into play. We sort the material and we try to make heads or tails out of what is coming at us. In 450 languages, we kind of specialize in our various divisions by the region, language, and so on. But the crucial thing is we also analyze, I should say we provide access to them, to all this material through metadata. Now, accuracy is very important, and in order to accurately portray or accurately create the metadata, we really need to modernize the current situation, the current terminology, as well as looking backward. We have this retrospective perspective that we take to make corrections in those items that are cataloged and in the database already. Today, I mean, how many people really know what librarians do in the background? You come into a library and you see the people who are in public positions, but you don't see the people who are actually doing the metadata, the cataloging of the incoming materials, specifically in research libraries such as the Library of Congress. Today, I hope to provide an insider's view of a certain kind of work that we do behind the scenes. It is significant enough to be the topic for such a presentation. So as our former Librarian of Congress, Dr. James Billington, referred to librarians as knowledge navigators. I think that's a very appropriate term for us because we are not policymakers as such. We don't analyze current affairs. We are not analysts, as so-called analysts. We're not scholars who produce synthesized knowledge in the form of articles, books, and so forth, but we deal with the products of the scholarly community. In my case, I provide access through description, the physical description of books, as well as a subject analysis. And that, of course, comes through proper terminology, i.e. controlled vocabulary. Controlled vocabulary is because when you look at the internet these days, you're using any term that you think of right away, and you come up with hits in the thousands and the hundreds, and you're not very accurate. In the catalog of the Library of Congress or in any other catalog of a library, you're going to have to use specific terminology, subjects and names, place names, corporate bodies, personal names, and so on. this is all the work that makes our day, basically. We are the people who provide you the accurate information. Now, in the past, of course, we've had examples of terrible cataloging, inaccurate cataloging. One of those things that I like to bring up as an example is in the past we used the term Russia for all of the entire area, for what is basically now called Eurasia. Then at a certain point, we decided to call it the Soviet Union. We thought this would modernize things, but we retrospectively started applying that term to ancient history. For instance, we'd have anomalies like Soviet Union history, Kievan period, 862 to 1240. Well, obviously, it sounds like an absurd term, but for the longest time, that term was used and everybody accepted it. It was just something that we did not challenge. So, information goes both ways. It could be used and misused. I presented a paper at the American Musicological Association's yearly convention. It was called Opportunities and Challenges in Presenting Ukrainian Music in Libraries. It was part of a decolonization program, and that is a current trend in Slavic studies nowadays. Most scholars are realizing that we have a very colonial approach to Russian history and other histories of the former Soviet Union, the various republics. So we need a new vocabulary, we need a new terminology to handle the materials that are being cataloged by our various librarians or metadata librarians. When I first started, I started working as a subject cataloger in 1983. So the first big challenge I had was to handle the incoming materials on the famine of 1932-33. It was exactly the 50th anniversary of this event. And people were starting to collect memoirs, testimonies, all kinds of studies were being published on the famine. But we didn't have a subject heading for this, so we had to use famines, Ukraine history. Or we could use famine as a free-floating subdivision under a country. Well, gradually I established Ukraine history, famine, and the dates, 1932 to 1933. And so what happened was that as a result, we started getting more specific because as the publications were coming in, we had to adapt to the various aspects of the famine. So we had famines in art, we established famines in literature. For biographies, we established victims of famine. Victims of famine in literature, Holodomor denial. Holodomor is the term, as you know, for the famine. Holodomor denial, and then Holodomor memorials, etc. So that shows you, in a way, illustrates how the terminology was developed and how it developed further. It was developed as the material came in, as the material warranted the developments of these kinds of new terms. So most recently, the major changes that occurred in the terms used to describe books on the Russo-Ukrainian War. Years ago, in 2014, when the first invasion started in the eastern oblasts of Ukraine, we developed a term called Ukraine conflict because, it was justified because it wasn't really a declared war as such. So we called it a conflict, just the way the Vietnam War had been called the Vietnam conflict until much, much later. So then the related headings, or the more specific headings, were developed where you could describe the battles and the various locations, the various campaigns, and so on under Ukraine conflict. But back in 2023, we got a request from the Library of Congress. We got a request from the Library of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. and various aspects of this terminology was being presented as inaccurate and so on. So we responded by setting up a special group to develop new ways of not only cataloging but then classifying Ukrainian history. So first it was a very limited development in the classification scheme. And then it was decided that the entire classification scheme for Ukrainian history, which was centered under one number, DK 508, it was expanded to give Ukraine 1,000 separate numbers from DK 5001 all the way through 5,999. And that was taken out of the old scheme for Russian and Soviet history and given its own place in a separate area of the schedule, the history schedule. Now, this had been done years prior to this for Poland and Finland. So those countries' history was taken out of that scheme for Soviet and Russian history, and they became quote unquote independent in terms of the library's scheme. So Ukraine got the same treatment. Now, the next phase of our modernization program is to complete the development for Kievan Rus. Kievan Rus was the East European home to the Eastern Slavs, as well as the Vikings or the Varangians, who were the eastern branch of the Vikings, who settled in these regions and set up a polity called Kievan Rus. Prior to that, it was Kievan Rus, but because the spelling was changed for the capital of Ukraine recently, it was Kyiv. So Kievan Rus became Kievan Rus. And so all the headings that were using Kievan Rus were changed to Kievan Rus, Kyivan. And also the classification scheme was moved from the early part of the Russian and Soviet scheme to a separate East European classification scheme, which was general. And because the territory of Kievan Rus spanned at least 3 or 4 countries that are currently existing. So it was decided that let's move it out of the one scheme for the Soviet Union, make it a separate development. So this was okayed by the policy office, and they're encouraging us to complete the development sometime this year, hopefully. And it'll have its own logic. But, examples of the kind of inaccuracy that we've dealt with, inaccuracies as well as the use of information as propaganda. And that is, I'll give you some examples of the kinds of, oh, by the way, I wanted to, since this is an informal presentation, I wanted to just note that a report that I published on the revised classification for Ukraine was published in English in the Bulletin of the Shevchenko Scientific Society for the last part of 2023. So that's available, and this is what it looks like. I hope you all can read that. It's in English. It just outlines what's the latest. So as I started saying, information can be used to provide access to resources, or it could be used to hide things. For instance, I just came across this book recently, and it's in Polish, but basically the translation of the title would be Jews in the History and Literature of Rus, or in Polish, Na Rusi. Again, this is confusing to most American catalogers and those who have to deal with the material coming from Eastern Europe. The book, the title will tell you that it's literature and history. Well, whoever it was, I don't know who cataloged this back in 1943, because that's the time it was cataloged. They have Jews-Soviet Union. Now, to any reader, you would see that heading and you say Jews, Soviet Union. That must be dealing with Soviet Jewry from the 1990s or earlier than that. But it has nothing to do with the Soviet Union, obviously, because I started looking carefully at this volume, and it dealt with Rus as Czerwona Rus, which was the eastern part of Poland at the time of the Commonwealth, and it really dealt with Ukraine. So I recatalogued it under Ukraine, Jews Ukraine, and Jews Kievan Rus, because it went all the way back to the Kievan period of the medieval times. So this is an example where the miscataloguing of certain things lead to confusion and misdirecting readers. Now, the other examples I have are the kind of virulent materials, publications that come out of the Russian Federation, especially in recent years. This is a book. It's the Church of Ukrainian Social Fascism. I'm just translating the title. It's Церковь Українського соціал-фашизму. And so this is the kind of hate literature that's being produced against the Ukrainian autocephalous Orthodox Church. It's not exactly scholarly material, but it's an example of the type of things we encounter all the time. Let's see. There's another item here. Oh, again, the newly established Orthodox Church of Ukraine has become an independent institution of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which was under the Moscow Patriarchate. What they've done is they fused all various branches of the Ukrainian Orthodox churches into one, and now it's called Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The title of this particular book is in Russian, Biese PCU, which is the demons of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Again, it's not exactly your scholarly work, but it shows you the fierce and very anti-Ukrainian character of a lot of these publications. But this whole idea that Ukrainians are extremists, they're fascists, they're Nazis, and this war is bringing out this to daylight the amount and the extent of the Russian propaganda against Ukraine. Ukraine has there is no, obviously people are aware of this, that the Ukrainian government is not a Nazi regime. This is just patently false. It's just it's a figment of Russian imagination, especially of Putin and his circles. And then when they declare a war against Ukrainian fascists and they're bombing cities indiscriminately in the name of protecting the the Russian speaking population of Ukraine, it again turns into an absurdity because, first of all, years ago, I cataloged, it's an example of the kind of what you call documentation of how the Russian attitude is totally off the wall. And I say this, very casually because there's a church in Odessa, and there was a book published on the restoration of this church in 1994. It was called the Spaso-Preobrazhensky Sobor. It was 100 years old in 1994, so it was built in 1894. This church was like 2 or 3 days after I cataloged this book, it was bombed. It was totally destroyed. And this is a church that belonged to the Russian Orthodox Church. So the irony is that in this indiscriminate bombing that's being carried out, here they went and bombed a church of their own church. It's just absurd to think about it in those terms. That and I noted this down. Talk about documentation. I established the name Spaso-Preobrazhensky Kathedralny Sobor on Odessa, and the note here, based on Radio Free Europe website, was that it was totally bombed on July or is it July 28th? July 23rd, I'm sorry. And so this is the kind of documentation that needs to be done, because otherwise you don't get the full picture. What I'm trying to establish here is a total picture. And very often, when people ask me what is the greatest satisfaction of my job, I said it's like putting together a puzzle, and we're basically contributing bits and pieces of information, bits and pieces of the puzzle, basically, to provide a broader picture of what's going on. You know, the other day, actually, this is something that was published by Timothy Snyder, June 2nd, when he talks about the importance of a book festival in the middle of a war. Ukraine's book trade is just thriving amidst this war. The fact that people are devoting time and effort to produce publications and read in their spare time as they're hiding in bomb shelters and so on, this tells you something about the resilience of Ukraine, and the fact that people are willing to take these risks. For instance, there was a major publishing house in Kharkiv that was bombed 2 years ago. The entire run of a popular novel was destroyed. And do you think they just stopped? No, they moved their facility, and they're still publishing. It's just a fantastic testament to the determination of Ukrainians not to give up. And what happened in the year 2014 as Ukraine was being invaded? In Moscow, there was a Ukrainian library, which hosted events as well as developed a nice collection for users. Well, as soon as the war was declared, or not declared, but as soon as the invasion began, they closed the library because it had extremist literature. They quote and unquote extremist literature. Well, not only was the library in Moscow closed and the librarian persecuted, I'm not sure what happened to her, but she was tried and so on. Whether she's still around, I have no idea. But it shows you that the Russian invasion is not just pursuing the defense of, obviously, the defense of Russian speakers, because everybody knows that's just totally inaccurate. They're doing genocide. They're really creating a genocidal situation against Ukraine. They're destroying whatever cultural institutions there are: schools, university libraries, museums, the churches. The churches are being burned. And there's so many. I was particularly struck as a librarian, and I remember attending a conference in Kharkiv, and then one of the day trips was to the birthplace of Grigory Skovoroda, the famous 18th century philosopher. Well, one of the earliest days of the war, his whole museum and that little town was bombed. The museum was totally destroyed. Now, it hit me personally because I figured, this is some place that I had been to, and I was very, very impressed by how this little community in the countryside takes care to maintain this museum. And here it was. The philosopher Skovoroda, if you look at most encyclopedia articles, he's quoted as a Russian philosopher. He never really set foot in Russia proper. He wandered throughout Europe. He wandered throughout Ukraine. He collected tales. He wrote tales. This is a man who was a Renaissance scholar, and yet he never set foot in Russia proper, but yet he's known as a Russian philosopher. And he wrote in an old version of Ukrainian, and most people just interpret that as, this is Russian, this is old Russian. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to cut this short because I'm getting carried away here. If anybody has any questions, I am certainly happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dobczansky. I'm sure we will have a lot of questions. I can talk myself. Natalia Sharina was the director of Ukrainian Library in Moscow, but this was quite some time ago. It was 2015 when she was sentenced to, I think, suspended 4 years. It was quite different time at this time. We don't know I don't know what happened to her, but it was way before the full-scale war. Any questions from our audience? And I need to remind everyone that we are also a library resource in a way. Please, I see people I don't know, probably. You know Yuri better than me. Some of you.
There's Pamela Perry, who's a colleague of mine at the library.
Wonderful.
Congress, and I see Erica Shike, who's also a colleague, and Barbara Dash. From the people that I see whose names appear here, yes, I'm glad you could join us.
The issues Yuri talks about are overarching. Of course, libraries kind of focus on this, but in any field, whenever you have to address these issues, there's a lot of reanalysis going on in terms of geography and cultural belonging and simply language, because it is, especially in this country where we don't know much about Europe in general and all the intricacies behind the borders. Does anyone have a question right now or a comment? Please, Barbara, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry.
Yes.
Couldn't find my microphone. Hello, everyone. I was just wondering what progress you're making on the Kiev and Rus classification and how you're going about it.
Well, our group is meeting every 2 weeks, and we've devised a series of new headings or new revisions to headings, to subject headings, but the scale of, or the scheme, I should say, has not been filled out yet totally, because we're working on a outline first of all the periods, all the subdivisions, all the names of the rulers at the time, various aspects of Kiev and Rus history, famous battles, and so on. So that hasn't been worked out yet, but I'm very hopeful that by the fall we should be able to publish the new schedule. That all depends on the workload of our other, the partners. There are currently like four or five of us that are involved in that.
How much do you draw on the collections? Like you were talking before about how your ideas change based on some of the materials that you see, but how easy or difficult is it to scan what we already have and build something from there?
Well, we're not going to reclassify the materials already in the system or in the catalog. What we will do is make adjustments to the subject headings. That's easier than trying to reclass and relabel and remove everything. So everything will remain the same except for new materials coming through. We'll get the new class numbers. It's a large undertaking, and we see it as a long-term project, and I'm just personally sorry that we didn't start this earlier, because I've already reached my 50th year at the Library of Congress, and it'll be time to be retiring soon. But this is keeping me going because it's something of a personal ambition of sorts. It's a personal goal. I'd like to be able to complete this project.
Yeah, don't go.
Don't go. Everyone says this. It's very encouraging, actually.
I have a question, Yuri. I can't get my camera to work, unfortunately, but I'll go ahead anyway. A few months ago, I was shocked to learn that Kittel, the editor of the New Testament etymological German dictionary, was a virulent anti-Semitic. It seemed to me such a contradiction. So I wonder, what do you think about the current members of the Soviet Academy of Sciences who are presumably just as craven?
Well, one example of the depravity of the certain individuals in that power structure of the Russian Federation is Kirill, the patriarch. He is telling soldiers, encouraging them to fight in Ukraine because if you die, you go straight to heaven. I mean, this is not canonical. It's not even religious. I mean, what religious leader would say this? You know, I mean, besides a lot of the radical Muslims, I mean, there's a lot of that belief in various, you know, I wouldn't really call them religious in a sense, but this is the kind of anomaly that exists in Russia. And they think nothing of destroying their own soldiers by not rescuing them they just leave them out in the fields to die. They don't go and rescue them. Or they'll send you like punishment battalions to enforce something that Stalin did in World War II. Send in these I forget what they call them, punishment battalions. These are people who stood behind the guys who were on the front line, making sure that they didn't retreat. So if you retreated, you were shot in the back, basically, by your own comrades. This is inhuman, and I guess it's something that needs to be understood by the general public. And this is who we're dealing with. And as I mentioned before, there's a whole slew of this literature that's being published in Russia, preparing the population. And it's popular literature, and I've seen examples of it in our own catalog, in our own library collection, of these are novels, and they're like dime novels, basically, but they all have these racy covers. They look like those beach novels that we all know about, depicting Ukrainians as fascists, as Nazis, as inhuman people who are just practically that the Ukrainian people are basically monsters. And no wonder there is so much hate produced in Russia. It's hate literature, downright hate literature.
Thank you.
So this is the
Anara,
kind of,
please. Yep. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, this is the kind of things we as librarians are witness to, because it keeps coming at us, and there's just no way to turn back. You have to face it and deal with it, and present it in such a way as to really pinpoint what this all is. And that's where our role as witnesses comes into play.
I grew up in Soviet Union, in former Soviet Union, and I know how we consider it, Ukrainian and Russian, especially in Central Asia, as all together.
Yeah.
And that's what not easy to divide even for us who are from former Soviet Union. And of course, it's more difficult for other people in America and Europe to understand the difference. At the same time, I am teaching now history of Soviet Union, history of Russia, history of Japan, and so on. And we use many publications from Library of Congress, because it is accessible. It's a very convenient for students to use. Unfortunately, they are a little bit old, but because of textbooks are super expensive now, students increasingly use publications on Library of Congress. And my question is, because of something changed, it's very important to explain what is the difference between these different countries. And also, I would like to ask you about your recommendation, how in the future we can explain young people what happened in the past and how they should consider this two nations, because I am talking about young people,
Well,
especially students.
right. Well, there's lots of literature. I mean, currently literature produced in the West and as well as Ukraine, but mostly I'm speaking of English material, English language works that are coming out, and where they do explain this. I mean, I can't think of titles offhand, but I mean, such a proliferation of literature coming out of the scholarly community, especially a place like Harvard. Harvard University has a Ukrainian Research Institute, and lately they've gone in the direction of translating popular literature, novels that are coming out currently uh, about the war, about identity, about just it's just an amazing output. In the past 10 years, I would say at least 50 titles have been published. And I just get these occasional announcements. And so I give them a lot of credit for actually, branching out into this non-scholarly field, so to speak. They're not producing they're producing histories, but also they're aiming at popularizing Ukrainian literature in this fashion. And I think eventually this will make its impact. People will start reading much more about Ukraine and the differences between Ukraine and Russia.
Mm-hmm. I'm also talking about the history of Ukraine, history. For instance, I teach right now history of Japan. We are using the textbook. It's not textbook, it's just history of Japan, history of Indonesia. It's extremely important for us that that's accessible, available online. So, and that's why I'm thinking in the future how it could be done for new Ukraine, for new Russia. And
Right.
so
Well, one of the authors who is a real specialist in history, that is Serhiy Plokhy, a professor at Harvard who teaches Ukrainian history. He has published at least 15 or 20 books dealing with not only Russia and Ukraine and the differences. He also has published a well-documented history of the Eastern Slavs and how they developed and the differences and how they relate to one another. And one of the texts that's really popular is called Gates of Europe, where he runs through at least 1,000-year history of prehistory all the way to the current war. Gates of Europe is extremely popular. It's very readable. It has footnotes, but it's very readable, and he's a master at making things easily accessible. I mean, you don't have to be a scholar to read his publications. Especially Gates of Europe. That's really one of my frequent recommendations to people.
thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I have a question as we have time. You mentioned librarian John Billington, I believe.
Yes, James Billington, right?
James Billington, I'm sorry. I assume you knew him personally.
Yes.
Can you say a couple of words? Because his book, The Icon and the X, was one of the first important books back, I believe, of the 80s, early 90s, which we read, we meaning my generation, immigrants to the United States. Billington's book was later translated into Russian, I believe. But I first read it in English. And what has changed, in your opinion, in these 30 years? He wrote when Soviet Union was just falling apart. We are now in a very different generation, kind of returning to this old mold, more of X than icon.
Right. I think we've come a long way. I mean, when I say we, the scholarly community in the United States, in the West in general, the understanding of Russian history has really branched out, and it's not the same as it was 30 years ago. I mean, people have really come to grips with what it means to be Russian, to be Ukrainian, to how it relates to the Baltics, for instance. In the past, the American reader basically didn't distinguish Russia was Russia. Soviet Union, Russia, same thing. It was synonymous. And interestingly enough, for someone who knows, like I know, I have a reading knowledge of Polish and other Slavic languages, and when you do comparisons of the materials published on Ukraine, for instance, there's a mass confusion, and I've talk about correcting things in the database that's already there. So much has been cataloged under Russia, whereas it really deals with Rus, Kievan Rus, or it deals with Ruthenia, which is the old term for Ukraine. Rus is the East Slavic, or I should say, even Scandinavian of origin of Ruotsi, Rus, all that. In Polish, the word Rus or Ruski refers not to Russia, but to Ukrainians in the Commonwealth of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. When you go back that far, Rusin and Ruski were the Ukrainians, were the Ruthenians, or whether it was Belarusians or Ukrainians. Ruski was the term, not Rossiyski. Rossiyski referred to the Russians. And interestingly enough, the Russian Federation is called Rossiyskaya Federatsiya, not Ruskaya Federatsiya. So there's a big distinction between the words Rus and Rossiya. And what the Russians did, or the Russian scholars at the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, they capitalized on the idea of the similarity. Russia, Rus, Rus, it's all the same. And in other languages, you have the distinction between Rus and Russia, Rus and Rossiya. For instance, the names of people, what they call themselves. Polak is a Pole. It's a noun. Ruski is an adjective. Russians call themselves Ruskie. They call themselves by an adjective. Rarely do you find a Russian person who will say Rossianin. Rossianin has its equivalent in Polish, in Ukrainian, and in other languages. So those are the nominative case for the nationality, Rossianin. Not Ruski. Ruski is an adjective. This is what I stressed in one of my presentations last year, that it causes confusion to the Western reader. An example that I used was the publication on Jewish literature and history, when it was cataloged under Soviet Union, which confused it even further, because we're talking about stuff that happened way, way, way before this.
I have another question. When you're talking about hate literature or otherwise false literature, like false historical literature, which there are plenty of, in your databases or wherever in your annotations, is there a accepted way to remark on the falsehood?
Well, yes and no. If it's a study of the hate literature, if the book deals with, analyzes this, so then you can use various terms like, anti-Semitism or hate speech or whatever. I can't think of the terms offhand. But for instance, Holodomor denial literature is about the Holodomor denial. But extreme literature, we don't really, I'm not sure how we handle that. That's a good question. But on the other hand, there was a case where, like years ago, there was an attempt by certain librarians to label books that were labeled, first of all, by the Russian Federation as extreme literature. Mm-hmm. We were somehow, whether it was the Library of Congress or whether it was the East Coast Slavic Consortium, and I had a bone to pick with this group, because I said, look, because they refer to this literature in the catalog as extreme literature, why should we do their work? We don't censor our publications. We don't make judgment calls like this. Unless, like I said, unless it deals with the topic of extreme literature, extremist literature. So we won that battle because we started cleaning up our database and decided to eliminate that phrase, from one of the fields in the catalog record.
Yes, thank you. Any more questions or comments, please? We have time. Leslie, please.
I don't know if I'm the best person to ask this question, and I know this probably isn't your field of, it isn't really your domain, Mr. Dobczansky, but I was just wondering whether the OCLC, which runs the Dewey Decimal System, has taken any similar steps to modernize and differentiate between Ukrainian and Russian and Soviet and Kiev and Rus and such.
Yeah, that's a good question because I don't really deal with the Dewey Decimal System. I mean, they're located here at the library. Excuse me. But I rarely deal with them because they primarily do the analysis or the cataloging and classification for English language materials for public libraries in the States. So they rarely assign Dewey numbers to books in other languages. Now, I mean, other libraries will do this. I know that certain research libraries in the US use Dewey Decimal. But we find that our collection is so large and so extensive that the Dewey Decimal numbers really aren't adequate. They become very long and very impractical. They're not specific enough, is basically what I'm saying. And I'm not sure whether they're actually tuning into the modernization efforts that from our side. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I suppose. It was as much as I could expect, I suppose. Thanks.
I have one more question, Yuri. About 35 years ago, a librarian named Alan Thrasher took me up to see the X class of documents in the attic of the Adams building. And if I remember correctly, that was a collection of U.S. Army confiscated hate literature of the Nazis. Is there anything like that the Pentagon is doing with the Library of Congress?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I'm sorry. That's a very good question, but I'm afraid I can't offer you any kind of information on that. That's beyond me.
Probably CIA.
Well, I'm sure they collect this type of material.
Thank you. As we discuss Library of Congress, can you give us a layman's resume in a couple of sentences? What are your Slavic collections? How extensive they are? What are you acquiring? How you're acquiring them? Can you buy everything that is published?
No, I don't think that's ever possible because we're dealing with so many countries, not only Russia, but Poland. We're having a hard time keeping up with Poland because we have a lot of exchange partners, and our vendors in Poland supply us with super amounts of material, and our selection officers are doing their job. And it's just really hard. It's really hard for me to give you a breakdown of in a couple of words of how much we of course how much we acquire. But of course, Ukraine has been publishing tremendous publications recently, even under wartime situations. Beautiful covers, beautiful editions. It just boggles the mind. And a lot of private individuals, private authors and so on, they've sent this material to us as a gift because our vendors are also providing us with materials. Our exchange partners are very anxious to get started once again, but how can you continue working? For instance, the library that we have, our biggest partner is the Vernadsky Library, the scientific from the Academy of Sciences, and also the what used to be called the Parliamentary Library. Their warehouse is in an area of Kyiv that was bombed recently. And under those circumstances, how can anyone possibly work normally to worry about, packaging books and sending books? And the Postal Service, to my surprise, is working quite effectively. I mean, we recently acquired over 100 books from the Institute of the Ukrainian Language from Kyiv, and 3 big packages arrived. And, I was just astounded by the quality of the publications. I mean, it's just, they're doing their work despite the war. But in terms of overall Slavic collections, we have a remarkable collection from all countries of Slavic origin, starting with the Balkans all the way to, it's just, I can't give you any numbers because I don't track the numbers, so I don't, but it's in the millions. Let's put it that way. When you consider that the library has over 180 million items in its collection, just think a large collection of that is Slavic.
Any more questions or comments, please? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more on how the library participates in right now in Ukrainian activities. Do you have exhibits, or do you participate in anything cultural which goes around in DC? What are the ongoing efforts around you?
Well, the library, in terms of Ukraine?
Yeah.
Well, there's the exhibit office really predominantly focuses on Americana. And so we as an institution really don't, I mean, there might be small exhibits in various divisions of the library, but in terms of the major exhibits in the exhibits halls for instance, the Jefferson Building, which is a public building, those are mostly focused on Americana, American history, American culture, music, history, whatever. I can't really tell you that there is much happening in terms of Ukrainian-related activities.
What you mentioned about wartime publishing is very important on our side. We also can confirm this because we are working with partners in Kiev to publish some anthologies, some books. Some of these were what I donated and sent to your library.
Yes.
And we know that these are remarkable teams who work in a heroic way under missiles and publish, and not only publish.
I'm glad you mentioned you've been sending a lot of your collections of poetry.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and the thing is, this really puts to the test the whole idea that Ukraine is persecuting the Russian language. I'd say a great number of publications that come from Ukraine are published in Russian. There is no discrimination against Russian publications. And in your collections, have the anthologies that you worked on include Ukrainian as well as Russian poetry. So
we did four volumes, yes, and in our new volume we will have mixed Ukrainian and Russian text
this is the year of poetry, or the God Poezy.
Yeah, God Poezy, Rik Poezy.
That's right.
Yes, it will be double language, bilingual this year. There are efforts like this. Plus, of course, you have a lot of expats. This was my next question. Maybe we should encourage people sending their books to the Library of Congress, because you surely cannot embrace all the many small publishers.
That's correct.
Which exist now. You definitely, I don't think you buy from a Lulu, and it's kind of self-published platform, as you know, semi-self-published, which where people publish. But there are also number of established publishers quite recently, such as Freedom Letters, which publishes many anti-war authors in both languages. And I'm not quite sure what is the mechanism other than people just donating their books
Just donate them. Yeah, send
to the
them to
Library of
the.
Congress. Is there still a requirement, and what does it apply to send what we call what do you call it, control copy to one book to the Library of Congress?
Oh, we welcome donations. There's no doubt about it. We welcome donations by authors, or if you're aware of people with collections. I mean, you would check with us first, but to see whether the Library of Congress catalog is available online.
Yes.
So I mean, you can always check for certain titles. But in terms of new publications, we welcome donations. You know where to send them, the Germanic and Slavic Division.
Yes, and this refers to everyone who will be watching us in recording. Please, Library of Congress is a great depository, and I hope it will withstand the winds of change as it has before. We will thank Yuri for his wonderful information presentation. If we have no more questions, this was our 223rd weekly discussion podcast of MUkraine, which is Marshall University library platform discussion group devoted to Ukraine and the war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for carrying this this burden. I mean, it is a burden to do a weekly presentation like this. I admire that. That's amazing work that you do. And as well as the people who support you, thank you very much to your colleagues. And I wish you the best. Keep going.
Great, thanks, and thank you for all that you are doing.
Thanks.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini. Slava Heroyam.
Heroyam
Thank
Slava.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.